Did you know your brain has two systems that constantly battle for control? One fast and impulsive, the other slow and deliberate? Welcome to Detailed Book Summaries, where we decode the world's most powerful books to help you think clearer and live smarter. Today, we're diving into Thinking, Fast and Slow by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman. This book breaks down how your mind really works and how invisible thinking patterns shape your decisions every single day. If you're ready to understand your mind, outsmart your biases, and make better choices, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. Chapter 1: The Characters of the Mind. Welcome. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of how our minds work with Daniel Kahneman's Thinking, Fast and Slow. This book isn't just about psychology. It's about how every decision you make, every thought you have, is shaped by two systems running inside your brain. Understanding these two systems can transform how you think, decide, and even live. Chapter 1 sets the stage by introducing us to these two main players, or characters, in our minds. Kahneman calls them System 1 and System 2. Think of them like two roommates sharing your brain. First, there's System 1. It's fast, automatic, intuitive, and effortless. Imagine it as your gut reaction, your snap judgment. It's always on, working in the background, quickly making sense of the world using patterns, shortcuts, and impressions. When you see a face, read a sentence, or slam on the brakes at the sight of a sudden obstacle, that's System 1 at work. On the other side, we have System 2, slow, deliberate, analytical, and effortful. It's the part of you that checks your math homework, focuses on complicated problems, or resists temptation. System 2 requires attention and energy. It's like the rational, logical roommate who gets tired easily but keeps you out of trouble. Now, the magic or trouble happens in how these two systems interact. Most of our day-to-day decisions happen under the influence of System 1 because it's quick and efficient. But sometimes System 1 jumps to conclusions or makes mistakes. That's when System 2 steps in to double-check, correct, or override. But System 2 is lazy. It doesn't like to work hard if it doesn't have to. So often, it trusts System 1's snap judgments, even when they're wrong. Kahneman uses vivid examples to illustrate this. For instance, when you see the phrase 2 plus 2 equals, System 1 instantly flashes for without much thought. But when you try 17 by 24, System 2 kicks in slow and steady to handle the task. The key takeaway here is that our thinking is a constant dance between intuition and reasoning. Sometimes our gut is right. Other times it misleads us. The more we understand these two systems, the better we can recognize when to trust our instincts and when to engage the critical thinker inside us. So, how do these systems influence our behavior beyond simple math? What kinds of errors do they cause? And how can we protect ourselves from the pitfalls of fast thinking? We'll explore all that and more in the chapters ahead. To wrap up this first chapter, Kahneman is basically telling us, your mind is a team of two, one quick and impulsive, the other slow and careful. Knowing who's in charge at any moment is the first step toward mastering your own thinking. Stay tuned as we journey deeper into the fascinating mechanics of the human mind in the next chapters. Chapter 2: Attention and Effort. In Chapter 2, Daniel Kahneman takes us deeper into the world of mental effort, focusing on what it feels like to engage System 2, the slow, deliberate thinker, and how attention is the currency for all mental work. Kahneman starts by pointing out something we all experience but rarely stop to analyze. Mental effort is tiring. Ever notice how focusing intensely on a task, like solving a tricky puzzle or reading a dense article, makes you feel drained afterward? That's your brain's way of signaling that System 2 is working hard. Attention, Kahneman explains, is like a spotlight. When you turn it on, you illuminate a small part of your mental world to examine it closely. But that spotlight isn't unlimited. You can only focus on so much at once before the mental fatigue kicks in. This is why multitasking feels impossible when tasks require deep thought. You simply can't shine your spotlight on two hard problems simultaneously. The chapter goes on to reveal that System 2 is inherently lazy. It avoids unnecessary mental effort whenever possible and prefers to let System 1 take the lead. This laziness explains why we often fall into cognitive traps. System 1 will jump to conclusions quickly, and unless System 2 is motivated to step in, Mistakes go unchecked. Kahneman shares fascinating experiments showing how easy it is to overload System 2. For example, when people are asked to hold a 7-digit number in memory while solving math problems, their ability to reason logically suffers. This shows how taxing mental effort can reduce our ability to make good decisions. Moreover, our self-control depends heavily on System 2's energy. Resisting temptations, staying focused on goals, and overriding impulsive reactions all require effortful attention. When our mental energy is low, like after a long day or during stress, we become more prone to snap judgments and poor decisions. But attention isn't just about avoiding mistakes. Kahneman points out that it's also how we learn and create. When we deliberately focus on something new or complex, System 2 helps us build new skills and understanding, shaping our long-term thinking habits. This chapter encourages us to be aware of when we're overloading our mental spotlight. It's a reminder that good thinking requires rest breaks and conscious effort. By recognizing when System 2 is tired or distracted, we can better manage our decisions and avoid costly errors. In essence, Chapter 2 teaches us that attention and effort are precious resources. Our mental capacity isn't infinite. So learn to balance the fast, automatic thinking of System 1 with the slow, focused work of System 2 is key to mastering our minds. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we'll see how these two systems create illusions and errors that shape the way we perceive the world and ourselves. Chapter 3, The Lazy Controller. By now, you've got a clear picture of the two systems inside your mind. System 1 zips around, making quick decisions, and System 2 patiently steps in when problems demand effort. But there's a twist. System 2, the slow, logical thinker, is not just limited in capacity. It's also downright lazy. Kahneman calls System 2 the lazy controller, for a good reason. When faced with a challenge, System 2 often prefers to take the path of least resistance. Instead of engaging deeply, it tends to accept the quick answers that System 1 provides, even if those answers aren't perfect. Why? Because thinking hard takes effort, and effort is something our brain tries to avoid. Think about how easy it is to accept first impressions. You meet someone and instantly size them up like, this person seems trustworthy, or that guy looks shady. System 1 makes these snap judgments effortlessly. System 2 could dig deeper, but usually doesn't bother unless something feels off. So most of the time, your lazy controller just nods along. This laziness has real consequences. It's what leads to many of our cognitive biases and errors. When System 2 slacks off, it fails to catch the mistakes System 1 makes. Your mind ends up running on autopilot, relying on mental shortcuts and stereotypes, which can be misleading or outright wrong. Kahneman explains that this laziness isn't a design flaw. It's a survival feature. Our ancestors who conserved mental energy had an advantage. After all, mental effort uses real physical resources. But in today's complex world, that lazy tendency sometimes gets us into trouble. The lazy controller also influences our decision-making in more subtle ways. For example, when you're tired or distracted, System 2's laziness grows stronger. You become more likely to jump to conclusions, fall for stereotypes, or stick with familiar ideas instead of questioning them. That's why being well-rested and focused is crucial for good judgment. There's also a funny side to this laziness. System 2 has a bias toward maintaining the status quo. It resists change because change requires effort, planning, and risk. Instead, it prefers sticking with familiar habits, even if those habits don't serve us well. Ever wonder why it's so hard to break bad habits? You're looking at the lazy controller protecting the mental routine. This chapter drives home an important point. Just because you can think deeply doesn't mean you will. The brain is wired to avoid unnecessary effort, which means a lot of the time your thinking is on autopilot. Being aware of this can help you catch yourself when you're taking mental shortcuts and nudge System 2 to step up. In essence, the lazy controller is both your brain protector and its saboteur. It keeps you efficient by sparing mental effort, but it also opens the door for errors and biases. The challenge is learning when to push System 2 to wake up and do the hard work. This is the groundwork for understanding why humans, despite having amazing cognitive abilities, so often make irrational decisions. The interplay between System 1's speed and System 2's laziness creates a tension that runs through the entire book. Chapter 4, The Associative Machine. Our minds are incredible machines, but not in the way you might think. Instead of running like a perfectly logical computer, our brains work mostly through associations, linking ideas, memories, and feelings together automatically and effortlessly. This is System 1's playground, where fast thinking happens by connecting dots in an instant. Kahneman calls System 1 the associative machine. When one idea pops into your mind, it instantly triggers related ideas, images, memories, or emotions. This cascade happens without conscious effort. You don't decide to think of these things. Your brain just pulls them up automatically. For example, say you hear the word fire truck. Immediately, you might picture a bright red vehicle, hear sirens blaring, or think of firefighters rushing to a rescue. These images and feelings flood your mind in a split second because your brain associates all these elements together. This associative process is powerful but also messy. It explains why your thoughts jump around, often without your control. It's also why first impressions, stereotypes, and snap judgments feel so natural. They come from patterns your brain has learned and stored over time. But here's the catch. Associations aren't always accurate or fair. They're shaped by your experiences, culture, emotions, and biases. Sometimes, your brain links ideas that don't belong together or reinforces false beliefs simply because they feel familiar or vivid. Kahneman points out something fascinating. The associative machine also creates a sense of coherence and meaning. Even when information is incomplete or contradictory, System 1 tries to fill in the gaps to create a smooth, believable story. This is why people can be so confident in their opinions, even if those opinions are based on shaky evidence. Another key idea is that these associations influence your mood and behavior automatically. If your brain connects certain situations with fear or joy, you'll react emotionally without realizing why. That's why sometimes you feel uneasy in a room with no obvious reason. Your associative machine is firing off old memories or warnings. This chapter helps us understand why intuition feels so real and convincing. It's not magic. It's your associative machine running its automatic program. But that also means intuition can lead us astray when those associations are misleading or biased. Importantly, this associative process happens without System 2's involvement. Your slow, logical thinker might not even be aware of these automatic links shaping your judgments and feelings. That's why it's so easy to be unaware of your own biases or mistaken intuitions. Kahneman's insight here is that being mindful of the associative machine, knowing how it shapes your thoughts and feelings, is a crucial step to thinking more clearly. Recognizing when your mind is running on automatic associations helps you pause, slow down, and engage System 2 for better decisions. As we dive deeper into thinking, fast and slow, you'll see how this associative power is the source of many cognitive biases and errors, but also how it's the engine of creativity, quick judgments, and everyday problem solving. Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease. Imagine this. You're reading a sentence that's clear, simple, and easy to understand. It flows smoothly, the words are familiar, and your brain barely has to work. Now, contrast that with a sentence that's dense, full of jargon, or printed in a hard-to-read font. Which one feels better? Which one do you trust more? This is a world of cognitive ease, the feeling your brain gets when information is easy to process. Kahneman explains that cognitive ease is powerful. When your mind experiences ease, it feels comfortable, confident, and safe. Your System 1 says, "This is fine, no need to question or think too hard." You're more likely to accept what you're seeing or hearing is true. On the flip side, cognitive strain happens when information is hard to process. Your brain notices the extra effort and triggers a kind of mental alarm. System 2 kicks in, your attention sharpens, and you become skeptical or cautious. You start to question the details, double-check facts, or slow down to understand better. Why does this matter? Because cognitive ease shapes how you make decisions, form opinions, and even how much you like something. For example, if a statement is written in a clean font and repeated often, you're more likely to believe it. This is why advertisers, politicians, and marketers use simple, repeated messages. They create cognitive ease that biases your judgment. Kahneman lists several factors that create cognitive ease. Clear fonts, good lighting, repetition, clear images, and familiar words all make your brain relax. On the other hand, blurry text, unfamiliar language, contradictions, and tiredness create cognitive strain, which makes you more alert. Here's a fascinating insight. When you experience cognitive ease, your brain releases dopamine, the feel-good chemical. This reinforces your confidence and sense of truth. But when you experience strain, your brain releases stress hormones, triggering doubt and careful thinking. This explains why people often trust things that feel familiar or easy, even if they're false or misleading. It also explains why first impressions stick. Your brain prefers to accept easy answers and avoid effortful thinking. Kahneman warns that cognitive ease can lead to mistakes. When you feel comfortable, you're less likely to question assumptions or notice errors. This is how biases creep into your thinking unnoticed. To sum it up, cognitive ease is like a mental green light that encourages quick acceptance, while cognitive strain is a yellow light that signals caution. Being aware of this dynamic helps you understand when your brain might be too comfortable and when it needs to slow down and dig deeper. This chapter is a powerful reminder that your brain's feeling of ease isn't just about comfort. It's a key player in shaping what you believe and how you decide. Chapter 6, Norms, Surprises, and Causes. Our brains love order. When things happen as expected, System 1 settles in comfortably, nodding along. But when the unexpected strikes, a surprise, a sudden change, something inside your mind sparks to life. This chapter dives into how your brain handles norms, surprises, and the search for causes. Kahneman explains that your mind builds a mental model of the world based on what's normal and predictable. These norms are like invisible rules, guiding your expectations of how things should unfold. When reality fits those rules, your thinking stays smooth and effortless. But life rarely sticks to the script. Surprises jolt your brain out of autopilot. When something unusual happens, a stranger's odd behavior, a sudden loud noise, or a twist in story, your attention spikes. System 1 quickly notices a mismatch and raises a mental flag. Hey, this is different. This alert triggers a powerful urge to find causes. Why did this happen? Your brain is wired to connect dots and make sense of events. It searches for explanations, often preferring simple, coherent stories over messy or uncertain ones. Here's the kicker. Your mind often fabricates causal links, even when none exist. This tendency is a survival tool. Understanding causes helped our ancestors predict dangers and opportunities. But it also leads to mistakes like seeing patterns in random events or blaming innocent factors for outcomes. Kahneman points out that your brain struggles with randomness. When things happen by chance, System 1 tries to impose order, creating narratives to explain what's really just noise. This is why people believe in luck, superstition, or conspiracy theories. Their associative machine insists on causal stories. Another key idea is how norms shape what surprises you. If your expectations are strong, even small deviations feel shocking. But if your expectations are vague, you're less likely to notice surprises. This chapter also explores how these dynamics influence emotions. Surprises tend to grab your emotions, making you feel startled, curious, or anxious. And once your brain settles on a cause, your feelings often align with that story: relief, anger, or satisfaction. Kahneman's insight here is profound. Understanding how your brain constructs norms and seeks causes helps you realize how often your judgments are shaped by automatic, sometimes flawed, storytelling. It's a reminder that your mind's drive for coherence can both help and hinder clear thinking. In the big picture, this chapter lays a foundation for understanding cognitive biases, related causality, and expectations. It shows how your brain's hunger for order drives much of your everyday thinking, for better or worse. Chapter 7, A Machine for Jumping to Conclusions. Our brains are wired to make fast decisions, often too fast. Kahneman reveals that System 1 is a master at jumping to conclusions. It quickly forms opinions and judgments based on limited evidence, leaping to answers before System 2 has a chance to step in and verify. This is partly because our minds operate under what Kahneman calls what you see as all there is WSIDI. When you assess a situation, your brain only uses the information available at the moment. It ignores what's missing, what you don't know, or what might be relevant but unseen. Imagine meeting someone new. Based on a few words or a glance, your brain instantly judges them, maybe as friendly, smart, or suspicious. You don't pause to consider all the facts or context. Instead, your mind fills gaps with assumptions and stories. That's the jumping to conclusions machine at work. This shortcut can save time and mental energy, but also opens the door to errors. Because System 1 ignores missing information, it builds a picture that feels complete and convincing, even if it's inaccurate. This leads to overconfidence. You feel sure about your judgment when really it's based on thin evidence. Kahneman explains how this tendency influences everyday life, from social impressions to financial decisions. When you rely on quick judgments, you might miss important details or fail to question your assumptions. Interestingly, the brain doesn't just jump conclusions, it also loves coherence. Once System 1 builds a story, it sticks to it, even if new facts contradict it. This cognitive bias helps explain why people hold on to stereotypes, false beliefs, or snap decisions long after evidence should have changed their minds. The chapter also highlights how difficult it is to undo these quick conclusions. Even when System 2 tries to intervene, the first impression often leaves a lasting mark. It takes deliberate effort and awareness to slow down, consider what's missing, and challenge initial assumptions. Kahneman warns that being aware of this jumping to conclusions tendency is the first step to better thinking. You can train yourself to pause, seek more information, and engage System 2's critical thinking instead of trusting the quick, automatic answer. This chapter emphasizes a core theme. Your mind's love for speed and coherence often blinds you to uncertainty and complexity. Understanding this helps you recognize when your brain is rushing to judgment and how to make smarter decisions by slowing down. Chapter 8. How Judgment Happens. Our minds don't just passively receive information, they actively construct judgments on the fly. Kahneman explores how these judgments arise, revealing that they're often quick, intuitive, and surprisingly fragile. The process starts with System 1, the fast, automatic thinker. When faced with a question or decision, System 1 generates an intuitive answer immediately. This happens effortlessly, based on impressions, associations, and memories. But here's the twist. Many judgments are shaped by heuristics, mental shortcuts that simplify complex problems. These shortcuts help your brain produce answers fast, but they often rely on incomplete information and can lead to errors. For example, when you're asked how likely something is, your brain might substitute a simpler question instead, like how easily you can recall similar instances or how vivid the examples are. This is called the substitution heuristic. It's why dramatic or recent events seem more common than they really are. Kahneman explains that your judgments also depend heavily on context. The way a question is framed, the order of information, and even subtle cues can push your mind toward different answers. This framing effect shows that judgments aren't fixed or purely rational. They're flexible and influenced by presentation. Another important insight is that your confidence in a judgment often doesn't match its accuracy. System 1 feels confident because the answer comes quickly and smoothly, but that confidence can be misplaced. You can be very sure about something that's actually wrong. This chapter also highlights the interplay between System 1 and System 2. When System 1 offers an answer, System 2 can either accept it without question or pause to evaluate it critically. But because System 2 is lazy and effortful, it often defaults to accepting System 1's intuitive answers. Kahneman's message is clear. Judgment are not the product of cold logic, but rather a blend of intuition, shortcuts, context, and sometimes luck. Being aware of these influences helps you question your gut feelings and strive for better decisions. In a nutshell, this chapter lifts the curtain on how our minds arrive at judgments. Quick, automatic, but vulnerable to biases and mistakes. Chapter 9. Answering an easier question. Kahneman reveals a fascinating quirk of the human mind. When faced with a difficult question, your brain often skips the hard part and answers an easier one instead, without you even noticing. This is the core of what he calls substitution. Imagine someone asks you, "How happy are you with your life overall?" That's a complex question. It requires you to evaluate many factors, your relationships, health, work, and more. Instead of doing all that mental heavy lifting, Your mind might instantly substitute a simpler question like, "What's my mood right now?" or "How do I feel at this moment?" The answer you give then reflects that easier question. So if you just had a great day, you might rate your life as very happy, even if other areas are less positive. This substitution happens so fast and smoothly that you're usually unaware it happening. System 1 is great at finding quick answers, and it uses any shortcut it can get away with to save energy. Kahneman explains that this is a normal, everyday process. Your brain constantly replaces hard questions with easier ones related to memories, feelings, or recent experiences. The problem is that these easier answers don't always match the original question, leading to judgments that could be biased or incomplete. This chapter shines a light on how subtle and unconscious the substitution process is. It also reveals why people sometimes give answers that don't fully reflect their true beliefs or the complexity of the situation. For example, when asked about someone's character, you might substitute the hard question, "Is this person trustworthy overall?" with an easier one like, "Does this person seem friendly?" Your quick impression then drives your judgment. The takeaway here is powerful. Your answers are often shaped by mental shortcuts that serve efficiency but sacrifice accuracy. By recognizing when substitution is at play, you can slow down and challenge yourself to tackle the real question rather than the easier one. In essence, this chapter uncovers a hidden mechanism behind your judgments and highlights the importance of awareness in overcoming mental shortcuts. Chapter 10, The Law of Small Numbers. In this chapter, Kahneman dives into a surprising and persistent error our minds make: the law of small numbers. The mistaken belief that small samples reflect the characteristics of the larger population just as reliably as big ones do. We all tend to expect patterns and stability, even when dealing with tiny amounts of data. When we see a small group or a brief sequence, our system one quickly assumes it should behave like the larger whole. This leads us to overinterpret randomness, seeing trends or meaningful signals where there might be none. For example, imagine flipping a coin just 5 times. If it lands heads 4 times, you might think the coin is biased. But in reality, small samples are naturally variable. Such streaks are common by chance alone. Still, your brain finds a pattern too convincing to ignore. Kahneman explains that this bias isn't just about coins. It happens everywhere, in business, medicine, sports, and even social judgments. People overreact to short-term results, assuming they reveal true patterns, and sometimes make big decisions based on these misleading impressions. What makes the law of small numbers tricky is how convincing the errors feel. Our minds crave certainty and coherence, so we overlook how noisy and unstable small samples really are. This chapter also touches on the consequences of this bias. It can cause poor investments, faulty medical diagnoses, and inaccurate stereotypes. People may jump to conclusions based on anecdotal evidence or early success, ignoring the risks of randomness. Kahneman warns that only large, representative samples give reliable information, yet we instinctively trust small samples as if they were just as valid. This gap between intuition and statistics is a fundamental source of error in judgment. The key lesson? Slow down. Question quick impressions, and always ask how big the sample is before drawing conclusions. Accept that sometimes randomness just looks like a pattern. Understanding the law of small numbers arms you against one of the most common traps of fast thinking: mistaking noise for signal. Chapter 11, Anchors. Imagine you're about to make a decision, but before you do, someone throws out a number, maybe a price, a statistic, or a guess. That number, even if totally arbitrary or irrelevant, immediately influences your own estimate. This is the power of anchoring, one of the most powerful and subtle cognitive biases Kahneman explores. Anchoring happens because System 1 is a fast, associative thinker that grabs onto the first piece of information it sees and uses it as a mental reference point. Even when you try to be rational, that initial anchor pulls your judgment toward it. For example, if asked whether the population of Turkey is more or less than 50 million, and then asked to guess the actual population, your answer tends to hover near 50 million, even if the real number is very different. The anchor sets a mental benchmark, subtly shaping your guess. What's wild is how resistant anchors are. Even when you know the anchor is random or unrelated, your mind still leans toward it. Kahneman points out that this bias affects everything from shopping and negotiations to legal judgments and salary talks. Anchoring works because System 1 doesn't spontaneously question the anchor. It just accepts it as a helpful clue. System 2, which could override the bias, often doesn't engage enough or doesn't correct fully, leaving your estimate skewed. The chapter also reveals how anchors don't have to be numbers. They can be any kind of initial information or context that frames your thinking. Advertisements use anchoring all the time, setting high prices first to make discounts look better. Judges may be influenced by irrelevant numbers when sentencing. Even random spins of a wheel can anchor decisions in experiments. Kahneman's insight here is a caution. Be aware of what anchors you encounter and how they might silently pull your thoughts. Before you accept a number or a first impression, pause and ask, is this the right reference? Am I being pulled by an irrelevant starting point? This awareness doesn't eliminate anchoring completely, but gives you a fighting chance to spot when your mind is leaning on a shaky foundation. In short, Chapter 11 shines a light on how your brain's fast thinking grabs onto the first number it sees, and how that anchor drags your judgment along, often without your awareness. Chapter 12, The Science of Availability. Our minds love to jump to conclusions quickly, and one of the tricks System 1 plays is rely on how easy examples come to mind when we make judgments. This is the availability heuristic, the tendency to judge the likelihood or frequency of events based on how readily they pop into our memory. Kahneman explains that when you ask yourself, how common is something, your brain doesn't scan actual statistics. Instead, it asks, how easily can I remember examples of this thing happening? If instances come to mind quickly and vividly, System 1 assumes the event must be common or likely. This mental shortcut is efficient, but it can lead us astray. Dramatic, emotional, or recent events tend to be easy to recall, so they feel more frequent than they truly are. For example, people often overestimate the danger of airplane crashes because they're widely reported and vivid in memory, while underestimating car accidents, which are more common but less sensational. Kahneman shows how media coverage, personal experiences, and stories influence what memories are available and shape our risk perceptions. This explains why fears and beliefs often don't match actual probabilities. The availability heuristic also affects social judgments and stereotypes. If you frequently hear stories about a group behaving a certain way, you're more likely to believe that behavior is typical, even if it's not statistically true. Moreover, the ease of recalling examples depends on your mood, cognitive effort, and recent experiences. When you're tired or distracted, System 1 relies even more heavily on availability, making you more vulnerable to biased judgments. Importantly, Kahneman notes that availability is about ease of recall, not the actual number of examples. You might remember a few vivid cases very easily, while many dull or forgettable instances slip your mind. Understanding this heuristic helps explain why our intuitions about risks, probabilities, and social trends often misfire. It also highlights the importance of seeking objective data rather than relying on gut feelings shaped by memorable stories. In this chapter, Kahneman invites you to question your impressions and consider whether your judgments are based on real frequency or just on what's easiest to remember. Chapter 13, Availability, Emotion, and Risk. Kahneman dives deeper into the availability heuristic by showing how emotion dramatically influences what we remember and, in turn, how we judge risk. When you think about danger, it's not just facts that shape your perception. It's how vivid, emotional, and memorable the examples are. Tragic. Terrifying events like plane crashes, terrorist attacks, or shark attacks grab attention and stick in your mind. Because these events are so emotionally charged, they pop up effortlessly when you try to assess risks. This leads to a powerful distortion. You overestimate the likelihood of dramatic but rare dangers while underestimating common but less sensational risks. Your brain's shortcut favors emotional intensity over statistical reality. Kahneman illustrates this with studies showing how media coverage, personal stories, and recent experiences boost the availability of emotional events. For instance, after a well-publicized disaster, people's fear spikes and their judgments about related risks become skewed. Interestingly, emotions don't just color memory. They also influence decision-making. Fear and anxiety can cause you to avoid certain risks disproportionately, even if those risks are objectively low. This explains why people might avoid flying despite its safety, or why they overbuy insurance for unlikely disasters. The chapter also explores how the availability heuristic affects public policy and personal behavior. Politicians and media often amplify emotional events to sway opinions, which can lead to disproportionate responses to some risks while neglecting others. Kahneman's point is clear. Emotions turbocharge the availability heuristic, making your risk assessments deeply flawed unless you consciously adjust for this bias. This chapter warns that while emotions are essential for survival and decision-making, they can also hijack your judgment by making some dangers loom larger than they deserve, a challenge for anyone trying to think clearly about risk. Chapter 14, Tom W. Specialty. In this chapter, Kahneman takes us into the curious world of stereotypes, intuition, and how we judge others, focusing on a classic example he calls Tom W. You're introduced to a fictional character, Tom W., described with a set of personality traits and interests. You're asked to guess what Tom's profession might be. Is he more likely a librarian or a farmer? Your mind quickly leaps to a conclusion based on the description, pulling together stereotypes and patterns you've learned over time. What's fascinating is how your intuition ignores hard statistics. Even if you know there are far more farmers than librarians, the detailed personality sketch makes you feel confident about your choice because it fits the stereotype of librarian better. Kahneman uses this to highlight a critical error in human judgment. Our minds tend to rely on representativeness rather than base rates, the actual likelihood of something. The representativeness heuristic is System 1's way of quickly categorizing people or events by how much they resemble a known pattern, instead of by objective probability. This bias explains why stereotypes are so sticky. They feel right and natural because they fit our mental image, even when they defy statistics or facts. Kahneman warns that while this heuristic is efficient for quick thinking, it often leads us astray, especially when we ignore important base rate information. It's like judging a book solely by its cover, ignoring how many books of that type exist. The Tom W. example is a powerful reminder that our snap judgments about others can be misleading, biased, and unfair. It challenges us to recognize when our intuition is trading speed for accuracy. Ultimately, this chapter invites you to slow down and consider both the intuitive impression and the hard facts, balancing System 1's quick categorization with System 2's careful analysis. Chapter 15, Linda, Less is More. Kahneman introduces one of the most famous examples from cognitive psychology, the Linda problem, to show how our brains stumble when faced with probabilities and logic. Linda is described as a bright, socially conscious woman who majored in philosophy and is deeply concerned about issues like discrimination and social justice. Then, you're asked, which is more likely, that Linda is a bank teller or that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? Intuitively, most people choose the second option, that Linda is both a bank teller and a feminist activist. It just fits her description better, right? But here's the catch. Logically, the chance of two events happening together, Linda being a bank teller and a feminist, can never be higher than the chance of either event alone. This is a conjunction fallacy, where people wrongly believe that more specific conditions are more probable. Why does this happen? System 1, the fast intuitive thinker, focuses on the story's coherence and how well the scenario matches a description. It ignores the basic rules of probability that System 2, the slow, logical thinker, would catch if it got involved. This chapter shows how our minds prioritize narrative and representativeness over strict logic, which can lead to consistent errors in judgment. The Linda problem is a striking example of how less is more. A simpler explanation, Linda is just a bank teller, is actually more likely than a more detailed story, no matter how compelling the story feels. Kahneman uses this to emphasize the gap between how people think about probabilities and how probabilities actually work. It's a vivid reminder that our intuitive judgments about likelihood are often distorted by storytelling and mental shortcuts. In practical terms, this bias can lead to errors in everything from medical diagnoses to legal reasoning and everyday decisions. We have to remind ourselves to pause, think carefully, and respect the math, even when our gut pulls us toward a more detailed, tempting story. Chapter 16, Causes Trump Statistics. In this chapter, Kahneman uncovers a fascinating quirk of our thinking. When it comes to understanding the world, we're much more persuaded by specific causes or stories than by cold, hard statistics. We naturally crave explanations. Our brains want to know why something happened, not just how often it happens. So when faced with numbers or data, System 1 struggles to engage. Instead, it lights up for vivid narratives and cause and effect stories, even if the statistics tell a different, more accurate tale. Kahneman points out that this preference for causal stories over statistics often leads us astray. For instance, we might hear that a certain group has a higher crime rate and immediately look for reasons, perhaps blaming cultural or economic causes, without appreciating that these statistics can be misleading or incomplete. This chapter also explains why anecdotes have such power in influencing opinions, policies, and personal beliefs. A single dramatic story can outweigh reams of data in our minds because it feels real and emotionally resonant. We see this effect in everything from politics to medicine. People are more likely to be convinced by a compelling patient story than by clinical trial results. Even when we intellectually accept statistics, our gut keeps circling back to narratives. Kahneman warns that this bias can distort our understanding of risk and probability. We might overreact to rare but dramatic causes of death, like plane crashes, while ignoring more common but less sensational causes, such as heart disease. The key takeaway: statistics provide essential context, but our minds don't naturally prioritize them. To think clearly, we need to consciously balance stories with numbers and avoid letting gripping causes blind us to the bigger statistical picture. Chapter 17, Regression to the Mean. Now Kahneman takes us into the slippery world of regression to the mean, one of the most misunderstood concepts in everyday life. And yet, it's everywhere. It sneaks into sports, business, medicine, education. Anywhere people are judged based on performance or results. So what is it? Imagine a student who scores way above average on a test. Naturally, you expect they're just incredibly smart, right? But when they take the next test and score lower, it doesn't necessarily mean they slacked off. It just means they got lucky the first time, and now they're sliding back toward their average. That's regression to the mean. Same goes for the athlete who has a record-breaking season, only to seem less impressive the next year. Or the salesperson who lands a massive deal one month and then underperforms the next. We love to explain this with stories. Maybe they lost motivation, maybe they got lazy, but often it's just random fluctuation. The problem? Our minds hate randomness. We crave order. So when someone's performance swings up or down, we rush to assign causes instead of recognizing that extreme results are often followed by more average ones. Not because anything changed, but because of statistical gravity. Kahneman also talks about how this messes with how we give feedback. Say you criticize a pilot after a poor landing, and the next landing improves. You might believe your scolding worked, but maybe the first landing was just a fluke, and the improvement was just a return to normal. This illusion of control, thinking our interventions have more power than they do, leads to all kinds of false beliefs about punishment, rewards, and effectiveness. We end up patting ourselves on the back for outcomes that were just part of the natural balance of randomness. Kahneman's big message here: when performance is partly due to luck, which it almost always is, don't get too excited by extreme success or too discouraged by failure. Wait, watch, let the average do its work. And always, always remember, when you see something extraordinary, chances the next thing will be a little more ordinary. Chapter 18, Taming Intuitive Predictions. In this chapter, Kahneman picks up where he left off with regression to the mean, but now he pushes the discussion deeper. The question is, how can we tame our overly confident, intuitive predictions that often ignore luck, base rates, and statistical logic? Let's break it down. Say you're asked to predict how successful a student will be based on their test performance. If they score very high, your gut instinct might be to predict they'll be top of their class. But Kahneman warns that this kind of bold, intuitive leap, driven by System 1, often overshoots reality. Why? Because it ignores the base rate, the average. Your mind loves to run with the new evidence and make a dramatic forecast. It feels exciting. It feels precise, but it's rarely right. Instead, Kahneman offers a 3-step fix. Number 1, start with the baseline. What's the average outcome for the group this individual belongs to? This is your anchor. Number 2, assess the evidence. How strong is the specific information you have? Is the test score a strong predictor of future success, or just okay? Number 3, adjust moderately. Based on the reliability of the evidence, move slightly away from the base rate, not wildly beyond it. Here's the key. Even when you have new, vivid, compelling info, your prediction should still be conservative. That's how you tame your intuition, not by ignoring it, but by reining it in with statistical thinking. This process doesn't come naturally. System 1 wants to leap. It wants to say, that student nailed the test, they're a genius. But the smarter approach is to temper enthusiasm with math. Think like this: yes, they did well, but how much does that really tell me about their future compared to others? And Kahneman's not just talking theory. He uses this in real-world contexts, predicting business performance, hiring decisions, stock investments, and more. The lesson holds across all domains, whenever there's uncertainty and whenever luck plays a role. The big takeaway from this chapter is that intuitive predictions are almost always too extreme. They're seduced by the vividness of new data and the illusion of certainty. But the real pros, the ones who make better decisions, are the ones who stay calm, trust the averages, and pull their predictions back toward the center. In other words, intuition makes noise. Data brings discipline. That's the core message of thinking, fast and slow. The better you understand your mind, the better you control your life. Fast thinking is useful, but slow thinking builds wisdom. Which idea from today's summary stood out to you most? Let me know in the comments. If this video helped you see your thoughts differently, don't forget to like, subscribe to Detailed Book Summaries, and share it with someone who needs a mindset shift. Remember, your brain is your most powerful tool. Learn to use it wisely. See you in the next one.